Welcome back, Doomtown fans, to part 2 of my Nightmare at Noon review. In this video, we're going to be looking at all of the non-dude cards in the pack. First up, we've got a couple of deeds to look at, and the first one is called Flint's Amusements. This is a 6 of diamonds, it's 3 to play with 1 income, and it's worth a control point. It's public and a casino. After each time a resolution ability on an action card is used, the controller gains a ghost rock, and then it has controller noon boot. If you used a cheatin' resolution ability this turn, draw a card. Well, the first thing that I'd say is that the ability to draw cards from a deed attached to a noon boot ability is really strong. Circle M Ranch is probably the best deed in the game, and this isn't quite as good as that. It's a lot harder to meet this deed's condition with versus Circle M, but the fact that we even have this potential new source of drawing cards, that alone is really strong. It's worth noting that the cheat and resolution ability doesn't have to come from an action card. There's quite a few decent spell abilities that have a cheat and resolution effect, so like Consecration or Fetch. Either one of these would satisfy this condition necessary to draw a card. That seems pretty easy to do on a continuum basis. You can hit them during low ball and you'd be able to draw a card as a result of that. Makes it a lot stronger than just having the spell effect, and I think those spell effects were already good enough to play just for that reason. The resolution ability on an action card, that seems a little harder to do because you're not going to necessarily have a recurring source of that. So that seems more like the type of thing that's just going to happen occasionally and it's going to be nice. It does work when either player uses it though. Unlike the cheat and resolution thing, you don't have to be the source of the resolution ability. It's just if somebody plays one and you control this deed, you get the ghost rock. That's kind of cold comfort though, given that most of the resolution abilities that see play are really strong. I've personally been using the It's Not What You Know pretty consistently in a variety of decks, and it's been absolutely brutal. It's just a really powerful card, and even though it's kind of expensive, it has a really good effect. I guess my main point is that usually when the resolution abilities are being played against you, you're getting pretty majorly devastated. So I don't know how much this Ghost Rock is really going to help. Now that said, if you're already playing stuff like It's Not What You Know in your deck, then this might just be a nice inclusion. It's a cheap deed at 3. It's still got an income. I think as long as you have a way to satisfy the cheatin' resolution thing within your deck, and I would say most decks do, then this is definitely going to be something worth considering. That drawing a card effect is easily the best part of it in my opinion, and that extra Ghost Rock trickling in is kind of nice. Next up is the card that AEG was kind enough to allow me to spoil, and that's Lula's Exploit. It's an 8 of diamonds, it's 4 to play, it has 2 income, and no control points. It's private, a strike, and it's out of town. During the upkeep phase, add or remove Ghost Rock to this deed so that it has 2 Ghost Rock on it. The controller may use the Ghost Rock from this deed to pay for abilities on gadgets. There's a lot of good things going on with this deed. First of all, this is just an out-of-town deed that produces 2 income. That's going to be pretty good. I think there's a fair number of decks that would consider it only for that, if it didn't have any other text. Now, it is also an 8 of diamonds, which is a really good value. I've talked in the past how I think 8 is just all around one of the best values. It's right in the middle, so you're not going to fail pulls. There's a lot of other good cards like Stephen Wiles at 8. So this is pretty easily going to make it into a variety of decks just on those 2 things, I would say. Now this gadget thing is certainly playable and is certainly good. We see quite a few gadgets, especially in the Morgan Gadget deck, that take a lot of Ghost Rock to power them. So things like Force Field or Flamethrower, both of these also at 8. These are really strong ways to utilize these Ghost Rock that are going to be floating on this deed. it seems to me like you're going to be able to get a pretty consistent value out of that. If you're getting into any kind of fight, you're probably going to want to spend some Ghost Rock using your gadgets, and this is just going to be a way to power that. So it seems to me like if you're going for a dedicated gadget strategy, this is a must include. I would probably play at least a couple copies of it. It's on a really good value. It's competing with Circle M Ranch, but you can pretty easily play this and Circle M, and then you could still probably play like one of the Pat's Perch, and you wouldn't really be out anything. You know, it's not like you have so many choices at 8 of diamonds that you're crowding your deck. This is a great card. This is going to play right into the hands of the Morgan Gadget deck, and I think that deck is getting stronger and stronger with each release, and this pack is going to add some more things for it. Next up, we have another deed for the Morgan Gadget deck. This is Testing Range. It's a Queen of Diamonds. It's 1 to play. It has no income. It's got a control point, though. It's private. Controller React Boot Pay 2 Ghost Rock. After a mad scientist succeeds at inventing a gadget, unboot them. It also has Controller React Boot. After you pull a club for an experimental card ability, ignore the result and pull again. Again, this thing plays directly into what the Morgan Gadget decks have been trying to do already. First of all, it's on Queen, and I think Queen has already proven itself a decent value for the Gadget decks. We've got the Vitality Tonic, which is just absolutely essential to overcoming things like Paralysis Mark and stuff like that. We also have the Biocharged Neutralizer. Not quite as good, but definitely still playable at Queen. Not to mention General Store, just one of the best deeds in the game, also at Queen. There's a lot of good options just at that value. Now, the thing that I really like about this is the second of the two abilities, the fact that you can ignore an experimental result. One of the things that's kind of frustrating about the current versions of Morgan Gadgets that I've been messing around with is that you basically have to go clubless in order to be able to do the best effects that you have. The Vitality Tonic I was just talking about, the Acid Coil Gun, R&D Ranch, the Teleportation Device. There are a lot of different really good gadget-oriented effects that you want to be able to use that are clubless. So all around, there's a lot of reasons that you might want to go totally clubless with the current Morgan Gadget builds. If you have Testing Range in your deck, it's going to be a lot more permissible to play like 1 or 2 clubs or just a handful of clubs, because when you hit them, you're going to be able to re-pull. That seems huge to me. Being able to play a few clubs helps you in a lot of ways. If you're not playing clubs, the most of a certain value that you can play is 12. So your draw structure is usually a little on the soft side. Being able to play a few clubs would really help with that. Not to mention clubs are generally some of the best combative effects in the game. So having access to a couple really powerful club effects could really throw your opponent off, especially if they see that you're playing essentially a clubless style. They're not going to really be expecting some huge bombs out of your hand. It's very common for people to cheat against the clubless builds, because if they're not playing clubs, they're missing out on most of the cheat and punishers in the game. So you might as well just go for a 5 of a kind every time you can. If you're playing a handful of these clubs, you can play some bomb cheat and punishers that could really, really surprise an opponent who's just cheating all the time and isn't really concerned because they think that you're basically playing clubless. I had just mentioned It's Not What You Know as being one of my favorite resolution cheat and punisher cards. That's at Queen and would be just an absolutely devastating way to surprise your opponent if they didn't think you were playing clubs. This first ability on Testing Range seems okay as well, although it's really pricey. I think if you're playing the Morgan Gadgetorium, I think that's usually enough. I usually start 3 Mad Scientists, so I'm not exactly in need of being able to unboot Mad Scientists and then be able to move them around. I usually have a guy that I can like give the gadget to after it's invented. Not to mention the Morgan Gadgetorium can just unboot a guy once, so that helps a lot of times as well. It's a nice thing to be able to unboot the guy. It certainly will be useful in a pinch, but I definitely see the second ability as being the primary reason why you'd want to include this. Since there's so much incentive to go clubless, the cards that are experimental just seem so insanely powerful to me and are kind of at the core of the deck, in my opinion. Next up, we have a new goods card. This is Dog's Duster. It's a 3 of hearts, it's 2 to play. It's a tire. While they are not wanted, this dude gets +1 influence. If this dude is a deputy, they do not become wanted for joining a posse at a private location. Then it has Noon Boot. If this dude is unbooted, call out a wanted dude at this location. This is another really solid design for a goods card. This is going to be really nice for the Law Dogs. The thing I'm liking about this the most is this Noon Boot ability is going to give you yet another way to call out dudes at home, something that the Law Dogs have already been pretty good at, but we kind of have to make some concessions and have to build in a particular way with the non-blessed decks to do that. The blessed decks have the advantage of having the arsenal, so pretty much all they have to have is an unbooted spell attached to one of their guys to call out at home. With this, you're going to be able to do that in the non-blessed decks, and I don't really see the blessed decks wanting to play this too much because of it's such a low value. So this is going to really fit in with the original Law Dog style, not playing spells, more just the standard straight up fight 'em kind of Law Dogs. You're potentially not going to have to play 8s. For a long time, I was playing 8 just because Bounty Hunter was a good way to call out at home. It interacts well with the outfit power. I think 3s are already a really good value for Law Dogs. We certainly have some dudes there. We have a lot of really solid club effects at 3, especially Sun in Your Eyes, just one of the best punishers for a combat. The Stakes Just Rose interacts really well with like Rafi Hamid or Prescott Utter. Shotgun is certainly an option as well. Works really well with Prescott Utter and some of the high bullet effects that are in the Law Dogs. Getting +1 influence from this is nothing to scoff at either. Law Dogs is not exactly the faction that's the best at flooding the table with influence. We have a lot of dudes that are 2 influence, but they're all pretty moderate costed, so it's kind of hard to just drop a ton of dudes and just flood the table. This is just going to be a nice way to survive a little bit longer while you're equipping up your dudes, you're giving their dudes bounties with your outfit power, and you're just generally setting up to go to the bandit's home and call them out. Next up, we have another goods card. This is Stoker's Saber. It's a 7 of hearts, +2 bullets, it's 3 to play. It's mystical, unique, a weapon, and it's melee. If there is an unbooted non-melee weapon in the opposing posse, it provides 0 bullets. That seems to be something that all of the melee weapons are doing. This dude gets +3 value, shootout boot, unboot a spell attached to this dude. You may use its abilities an additional time this turn. In the previous video, I talked about how I thought the junior guy, the new 4th ring dude, would be pretty useful with a mystical good later in this pack. This is what I was referring to. This shootout boot ability is really sweet, especially if you're already playing a lot of offensive spells like most 4th ring decks do. It is worth noting that you're going to have to do it during a shootout. So some of the best spell effects that we have, like I would argue Paralysis Mark, definitely one of the best spells in the game, that's a noon ability. So you're going to have to engineer a situation in which you'd be able to use this shootout ability to unboot it and then be able to use it again maybe later. There are certainly no shortage of good shootout abilities attached to spells though. Soul Blast, really strong. Blood Curse, really strong. Shadow Walk, potentially really strong. Just generally, there's a lot of good things we can do with this shootout boot ability. Pretty much any time we're pulling it off, it's going to have a lot of value. The +3 value for the dude who gets this weapon is also pretty nice. I think it could potentially be really strong as a way to defend against opposing spells or just other value-oriented effects. We like to see that. This card, though, I think has the most potential in the Sloan Huckster deck. And the main reason I say that is that it's on 7, which is already a good value for that deck and just generally for the Sloan gang. It's also got the bullets, which are going to matter a lot more in a deck that's looking to draw shootout hands more. Most of the 4th ring decks are pretty control-oriented. They're not necessarily looking for tons of shootouts, and the +2 bullets isn't going to be quite as easy for you to capitalize on it, I would say. This is certainly a match made in heaven for Jose Morales, who has a bonus to his Huckster skill equal to his bullet rating. It's going to potentially make it a lot easier to hit somebody with like a Soul Blast or whatever. This is a pretty cool card. It's a little pricey. It's certainly only going to work in a deck that can make use of that shootout boot ability, but I think that it's versatile enough that we could see it played in basically any deck with spells, and it's just going to be an interesting one or two of in a variety of decks. Next up is another goods card. This is called Fate Dispenser. It's a Jack of Hearts. It's 1 to play. It's an improvement, a gadget, and it has difficulty 10. After this is invented, attach it to an in-town deed you control. And then it has Controller Noon Boot. If your hand has fewer cards than your maximum hand size, draw a card. This is potentially a pretty huge game changer for the gadget-oriented strategies. Like I've talked about in the past, being able to draw cards is extraordinarily difficult in Doomtown. Easily the best way to do it is Circle M Ranch, or just drawing at the end of your turn, I guess if that counts. But in general, it's really, really hard to draw cards in Doomtown. This is potentially a way that you could have multiple draw effects in play and be able to draw 2 or 3 cards in a turn. Now, it's attached to a 10 difficulty gadget. That's certainly a limitation. You're certainly going to have to be smart about the way that you build your gadget-oriented deck, and a lot of times the decks that I've been building go down to at least 8 in terms of the values of the gadgets they want to play. So at 8, you're going to have a Mad Scientist 2 to be able to make this pull. That's certainly doable, especially within Morgan Cattle Company, but I think in general this is going to be pretty hard to play just because of that difficulty 10. So again, we're probably only going to see this in the Morgan Cattle Company deck. I wanted to quickly point out that this is an improvement, so it's going to work with Howard as well. I've been starting that guy as my grifter in the Mad Scientist build, so it seems to me like it would make a lot of sense. Another really cool design. This is pretty much exactly what I like with goods cards. They have very narrow effects that only work in a couple decks, but the effects that they have work really well in those decks. Cool design, I really like this card. Next up we have another goods card. This is called Soul Cage. It's a Queen of Hearts, it's 3 to play, it's mystical, it has Cheat and Resolution Boot. Choose an abomination from your discard pile or boot hill with a cost equal to or lower than the illegal hand's rank. Put it into play at this location at no Ghost Rock cost. If this is a shootout, it joins your posse. Well, this is pretty strong. It's again a very narrow use goods card, but it definitely has a strong effect. Being able to play an abomination for free, we can already kind of do that with Raising Hell, but this is going to be yet another way to do it. On Cheat and Resolution, you could potentially fire it off during lowball. That seems really good to me. I don't know how often you're going to be doing this during a shootout, but it's potentially a good thing to do there as well. For me, it seems like this is the type of thing where you're going to be firing it during lowball occasionally. You're going to get one of those guys in play. He's going to be able to do some cool stuff. Now, it's really expensive at 3. That's a lot to spend, especially in the early game for this effect, so this is definitely more of a late game card. The other thing I'd point out is that at Queen, we certainly already have enough good stuff, I would say. Like, I like to play as many blood curses as I possibly can in my 4th ring decks, and I haven't really been playing abomination-oriented 4th ring decks, so maybe that'll be a little different for those. But in general, I think that Queen is a value that we've already got some good options at, so this is kind of competing there. It certainly seems like it's going to be worth playing 1 or 2 of them. This is potentially another option for either Junior or Richard Slavin. Either one of those potentially could interact well with this, especially if you're only playing like 1 or 2 of it. Seems pretty good to me. It's worth pointing out that this has a pretty massive restriction with the cost having to be equal or lower than the rank of the illegal hand. So if you're firing this off during a low ball, I mean, realistically, 3 of a kind is probably the best hand that they're ever going to get on low ball. So you're definitely going to be limited with that. But it seems like even just getting back like the Brute or like Bobo or somebody like that is going to be worth it. And it's going to be pretty easy to do. So I think that while that is a limitation, some of the best targets for this are already pretty cheap. So it seems pretty possible to me. Next up, we have a new miracle. This is For Such a Time as This. It's a Jack of Hearts. It's 1 to play. It has Shootout Miracle 9 Boot. If successful, mark the town square for a job. This dude is the leader. If the job succeeds, search your deck and discard pile for a dude whose grit is less than this miracle's skill check. Play that dude, reducing their cost by 4. That dude permanently gets +1 influence. Ace this card. Here's another really solid option for the miracle-oriented decks. This is kind of like Raising Hell, sort of, except the miracle side of it, I suppose. This is a really strong card. It seems to me like the restriction on the grit thing is such a non-issue. There's going to be so many dudes that you're going to be able to get just at grit 9, let alone some other, if you manage to pull quite a bit higher than that. And there's already a lot of incentive in the Blessed Law Dogs deck to be able to pull really high, since a lot of the miracles require 9s or 10s or pretty high numbers. Not to mention Parry In Body has a 9 difficulty Noon Boot ability as well. So there's already a lot of reasons that you're going to have to make these high pulls if you're doing Blessed. So I really don't see that grit thing. I mean, it's just going to stop you from like the absolute best dudes that are in your deck. Another sweet option for this emerging archetype isn't competing with anything else at Jack. It's going to be a high pull value with a strong effect. All around, I definitely expect this to see some play in the Blessed Law Dogs decks. Speaking of Blessed Law Dogs, next up we have another miracle. That is Sword of the Spirit. It's a King of Hearts. It's 0 to play. It has Noon Miracle 7. Choose a dude with a melee weapon. While they have that weapon, they get +1 bullets, become a stud, and cannot be affected by opposing spells. This is something I've been looking for in Doomtown for a long time. That's specific effects that deal with spell effects. I think in general the spells have been pretty unchecked, and they've been some of the most powerful abilities in the game just because there's no real way to deal with specifically spells. This is the first way to do that in this game, and I think it's in a really, really strong version of that. Not only are you going to be immune to spells, which is just so huge, you can't get paralysis marked or whatever, you're also going to become stud and get bullets. Man, this card's awesome. I think this is probably my favorite miracle so far. It's definitely up there. It's going to be a high pull. It's not competing with other values. King is probably not on value for your draw structure, so that kind of sucks. But in general, I think it's going to be pretty easy to make room for 2 or 3 of these in most of the Miracle Law Dogs builds. Now, we have an obvious limitation that you can only do it on a dude with a melee weapon. So that means that you're going to have to play a melee weapon in your deck. That's kind of unfortunate. It seems like it's going to be pretty doable, though. There's quite a few decent options that we've had in the last few releases, so it seems like it's going to be worth making that sort of concession to your deck building to be able to get this effect. I think it's definitely going to be worth it just because of how good the spell effects are in the game. I wanted to quickly point out that this and Consecration both don't boot, so if you're playing those in the arsenal, it's going to be nice because you can use the spell effect and then still boot it to call a dude out with the arsenal. I really like this design. It gives you something that you can do in no other way, and it forces you to play some kind of card combinations like a melee weapon in order to make it work. This is a really great design. I really like this Miracle, and I'm definitely going to be trying out this Blessed Laudon deck. The last few cards in the pack are all action cards, and the first one that we have is A Fight They'll Never Forget. This is a 2 of clubs, it's 0 to play. It has Headline. This is a new mechanic here. Only one headline can be played per shootout. Shootout, each dude in your posse gets +1 bullets. After each time a dude is aced as a casualty, the shooter in the other posse permanently gains a control point. Ace this card. I'm not really wild about this shootout effect. It seems to me like the +1 bullets for your whole posse, that's not going to matter most of the time. I think a lot of the times it's just going to be like you draw one additional card. I could see it interacting well with card abilities that key off of bullets, but in general, this +1 for your whole posse isn't that great. This second part about getting control points, that's cool, but it's only if there's aced as a casualty. And that's going to be, I think, reasonably difficult to do. You're not going to be able to pull that off all the time. The thing I'm most excited about with this is the introduction of the headline mechanic. I really like this. I think headline is going to be a really good thing for the game, and I'm really anxious to see what they come out with next. Headline could be really, really interesting. It definitely makes the lowball winner a lot more interesting and dynamic. It's already really powerful to be winning the lowball priority and being able to use your shootout effects first. But if you could potentially also play the headline and your opponent isn't able to play one, that could really, really ramp up the power level of that. So I like this mechanic. I'm interested to see what they come out with next. I'm not super wild about this particular card, though. Next up, we have Buried Treasure. This is a 10 of clubs. It's 2 to play. It has Noon, ace a card in your discard pile to gain 3 Ghost Rock and draw a card. While having played Magic and a bunch of other card games, I pretty much have to like this card. The ability to get cards out of your deck is going to be nice, especially redundant copies of particularly key effects. You're also going to be able to essentially gain a Ghost Rock as well as cycle this card just for playing it. It's also a high value, so it's potentially going to meet your pull requirements. The only thing I don't like about this card is that it is a 10. There's so many good 10 clubs, and there's so many good 10 clubs for a variety of strategies. Unprepared is probably the best shootout effect in the game, I would argue. Too much attention is really strong for a variety of reasons, helps you control the pace of the game. And Recruitment Drive is insanely powerful in any deck that's trying to be really aggressive and get jobs going fast. So this is definitely going to be competing with some other 10s, especially the Unprepared. It seems like cutting Unprepareds for this is a little lackluster. So I like this card. I think it could potentially be used to enable acing effects, like if you had something that was based on Boot Hill or when something was aced, stuff like that. But in general, I'm not sure this is going to be good enough just because it's going to be competing with other 10s. The last card in the pack is appropriately called Nightmare at Noon. This is a king of clubs. It's 0 to play. It's a headline, which as we learned means only one headline can be played per shootout. It has shootout. Each dude in one posse gets -1 bullets. Each dude in the shootout with 0 or 1 bullets becomes a draw. I certainly like this quite a bit better than the other headline that we had in this pack. It seems to me like you're going to much more easily get a big value out of giving your opponent's posse -1 bullets. A lot of times that's going to reduce their shooter by 1, so they're going to be drawing 1 less card. Potentially could also make several of their dudes draw that were stud. Now that could backfire. It's worth noting that each dude with 0 or 1 bullets becomes a draw. So if you have a 1 stud in your own posse, he's going to become a draw. This isn't blowing my mind, but it's certainly not bad either. I could definitely see getting some value out of this, and this is potentially going to only get better over time as we see more powerful headlines. So this could potentially be used to counter other headlines, like, if you play yours first, they're not going to be able to play theirs. So I think in general, this is going to kind of rely on what we see in the future from more headlines. That's going to do it for my Nightmare at Noon review. This pack is really good. I really think that the design team has hit their stride, and I'm very anxious to get some of these cards to the table. There's a lot of specialized tools for decks that are kind of emerging in the metagame, and I really would like to see Morgan gadgets get to a good place. I feel like we've gotten a lot of really strong cards in the last few packs, and this pack I think really pushes it over the edge. That's certainly what I'm going to be messing with the most in the upcoming months. Well, I hope you liked the review, and if you did, be sure to subscribe and push the button that looks like a thumbs up. I'll see you again for some more Doomtown reviews.